the next day of the lectures on the Summer School of Democracy program. So today, basically, we'll focus on the process of the decision making. And the first lecture will be presented by Dr. Alexandra Ionascu from the University of Bucharest, and it will be on the elites and the decision making process in Romania. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to thank the organizers. It's always good to be here in Wrocław. I don't know. So after lots of conferences on different issues about democracy and European crisis, we shall continue today. We already won the weather fight, so today hopefully we shall continue with different lectures as next week. We are going to do some field work, so it's going to be up to you to do the job. Now, for today, I thought about speaking about political elites and the decision-making process in a broader context, but I'm not going to give like a standard lecture about what I'm thinking of the political elites and the decision-making process, but instead I'm going to do what you are supposed to do next week, that being to construct a research design, and then that will be tested on different cases. And you are going to have like interviews with different leaders at national level, but also local level. So basically, you are supposed to do this work by yourself, challenging, picking one topic, looking a little bit at the literature, and then constructing your hypothesis. Going and ask different persons what they think of different issues in order to construct your final findings that you shall present during the last session next week. Now we shall do the same, and I'm going to construct based on my previous researches, but also from picking different examples from the literature and determining the main trends in order to provide, to generate some hypothesis by the end. So the main idea, my main statement would be that basically, okay, my main standpoint would be technical problem. Basically, that you can understand the EU problems, European crisis, but also the lack of solutions in nowadays society, the European society, through the glances of the lack of coordination, through the glances of the leadership crisis. So basically, we are going to lower the level, we are going to look at political elites and how they cope with this. And I'm going to take into consideration three main rationales. The first one would be, and we are going to develop this later on just to bear in mind what I'm going to speak about. The first one is going to be the mismatch. The mismatch between what you are learning in school, the general theory about the regime functioning, delegation, the accountability, what is the representative democracy on one side, and what you can find on the field, that being how do political regimes actually work in practice. And you are going to see that the main difficulties, and you have heard that at the level of the literature, but also in your different researches in your country, that the main problem is the oversight problem, that being the way in which the accountability measures are articulated in different contexts. So basically, I'm going to see that there are deficient mechanisms. These deficient mechanisms are affecting all democracies nowadays, affecting especially what you have learned in school as being the check and balances system. The second part will go into the black box, that being within different institutional settings, and see a little bit how the decision-making process is articulated, how to link different institutions and individual actors. Does it matter that we are going to pick some political leader, some political actor, and not other when constructing the government? It doesn't matter whether you are going to have an MP or another by the end of the electoral process. Because theoretically, it doesn't. So from the political science perspective, it doesn't matter whether you, Miss Sleeping, or another person will come into office as long as it is validated by the general public. And thirdly, we are going to see that basically the way in which institutions are functioning nowadays are affecting the articulation of the decision-making process, creating a problem of coordination, that being individuals do tend to rely on their own resources in order to articulate the decision-making process. They do tend to individualize themselves, to become autonomous actors within institutions, creating this sort of problem of coordination that is going to be enhanced by processes that hopefully should bring us something good, that being, for instance, the decentralization process. As you all know, in the beginning of the 90s, there was a whole debate about how to democratize, how to bring closer to the citizens the decision-making process, and that being to have different elections, local level, that being having different mechanisms for which citizens are going to express themselves over different policies. And we're going to see that this process, although more democratic, bringing more accountability, can actually create opposite effects. That means you are going to have more or less problems. You are going to have more and more problems with coordination and the articulation of decision-making, and even with the politicization as it was thought at the origin. So, let's go back to the first point. Now, the mismatch. You are all aware of this general scheme about how representative democracies are working. So basically, you can describe all democratic regimes as being characterized in this way. Being, you are going to have the voters, okay, it is an analogy from Strom, Miller, you have read them in school, but just to tell you a bit, the general scheme, so basically you are the voters that are delegating their powers to the MPs, that are going to delegate their power to the Prime Minister, that is going to pick his team, her team. And then in order to create different policies, you are going to have different ministers, junior ministers, that are going to create policies and implement them. And in order to do so, they are going to rely on the bureaucratic field. And that will be the genuine process of delegation. Now, in order to have an effective democracy, in order to have a substantial democracy, then you have to have a reverse process of accountability. That being every 4 years, MPs are going to present themselves in front of the electorate, and they're going to say, look, we have done this and this, so they're going to be sanctioned or approved in order to get re-elected, or they're going to dismiss, and so on and so forth. So the government in his decision-making process basically is going to be accountable to the parliament, otherwise you are going to have a governmental reshuffle. And the ministers in their terms are responsible in front of the Prime Minister that can actually decide to remove a minister. So basically, in order to be a substantive democracy, you should have this reverse process of accountability in which each is going to be responsible to the agent who delegated, to the principal that delegated that competencies. Now, this is common knowledge. What is happening in European democracies, and you have seen it constantly, particularly with the literature on the effective democracies and democratization, it is a crisis of oversight. That being the mechanism through which actually the accountability is taking place. Basically, in theory, the government is responsible in front of the parliament. The parliament is responsible. Okay, different parties from parliament are responsible in front of the electorate, and so on and so forth. Now, initially, this was considered a characteristic of Central and Eastern European countries. No, so you have had that very well-known formula of O'Donnell saying, look, these are defective democracies, these are the legative democracies. That being, you do have free elections, but you do not have the system of check and balances. You don't have substantial checks between institutions. So basically, political actors are doing whatever they want in order during two electoral terms. What is happening, however, at the European level, no matter the distinction between the Western side and the Eastern side, it is a general tendency of presidentialization of politics, you know, the literature, no overall emphasis on the executive power, the idea that government actually controls the parliamentary agenda. You have some data from Italy. For instance, in the beginning of the 90s, 40% of the bills proposed by the government were accepted by the parliament. Already in 2000, they were more than half. Okay, when compared with Central and Eastern European countries, such for instance the Romanian case, where almost 90% of the bills adopted by the parliament are actually the governmental initiative, it is true that you do have this divide, but more and more you have the genuine trend towards the executive centrality, so a concentration of power on the governmental actors. Now the problem is how to ensure oversight, because basically what you are going to see is the government becomes more and more a veto player at on the parliamentary scene. So instead, in theory, you would expect that the parliament will check the government, okay, and sometimes will sanction the government. What is happening reverse is that basically the government will intervene on the parliamentary arena. And you will have an effect of negative agenda control. You will have the government that is going to take the floor, controlling, blocking the initiatives of the opposition by proposing its own bills. You are going to have, as in the Romanian case, for instance, if you are going to do field work, you are going to have the government that is hijacking, basically picking up different bills proposed by the opposition, and it's going to take the issue ownership and present that bill as being a governmental initiative as such. So basically what you are going to see that on one side, the government controls the creation of different bills through direct initiative, but at the same time it will try to interfere into the parliamentary arena and parliamentary game in order to control the parliament. So you are going to have rather reverse sorts of oversight within that, which brings us potentially to the overall domination of the executive teams. Now, of course, not all forms of oversight are failing. As you know, there are four main types. So basically, in order to control what a government will do, there are ex-ante mechanisms on one side, that being you can control what a government will do through contract design, the moment in which the government will be voted in parliament for the first time, you are going to have the government approved by the parliamentary majority, or the governmental formation process, that being parties that are picking persons that are actually close to the Prime Minister. They do have party seniority, they rely on their track, their behavior to be obedient in their offices. So these forms are not actually decreasing, or it appears so from this overall model. What is decreasing are the ex post forms of oversight, that being parliamentary questions, interpellations, the way in which parliaments are actually working in order to control the government. the fact that basically you can bring amendments to the bills proposed by the government. These forms of oversight are rather mythological forms and are described like that at the level of the literature, as they do not work properly in current political system. Because, of course, there are other issues such as the governmental efficiency or, as we have seen with the other lecture, the short time at the disposal of the government in order to undertake different solutions. But basically, the oversight forms of what is at the basis of check and balances between the two powers are actually failing. Of course, there are new forms of oversight in the external part, that being you can screen for financial issues, or you can have constitutional courts. But these new actors are not, for the moment at least, institutionalized as main veto player to the governmental function. So in this way, we basically are in a general landscape in which, okay, and in here you have some data taken from the Romanian case. These are the famous emergency ordinances that Ionascu spoke about, that being the government can undertake different decisions that they immediately apply without having the parliamentary approval. And after that, they are debated in parliament, and they are either accepted or rejected. It's sort of the Italian case, although there are differences. And in here you have, for instance, the evolution of the legislative process. So this would be the evolution of bills that became laws from, these were initiated by the government, and these are the initiative of OPMBs. Now in the Romanian case, of course, there is a problem of professionalization of political elites. Sometimes the bills are not well constructed. So basically, in the overall body of laws that are adopted by Parliament, most of them, as you have seen, are actually initiated by the government. Now, governments become the central point of the decision-making process. And of course, this has been reckoned at the level of the literature, but it hasn't been considered an alarming point. It wasn't being considered as a crisis of the decision-making process or a crisis of democracy. And that was because we've considered the government as being a party playground. We are going to have a party in government. We are going to have different representatives that are elected in parliament, that are going to designate the majority, and they are going to control, on the basis of their program, different decisions. So it is a party playground at the origins. What is happening is that the decline of parties actually reshuffle this general view on political parties. So instead of having the party government paradigm that you have heard about, that Bach wrote about, you are going to have rather parties dominated by the political actors in public offices, and I'm not going to insist on that because we have studied that in political science. So you are going to have different leaders that are going to dominate these organizations that are lacking members, are declining, are lacking to a certain extent their membership bases, given the high ratios of electoral volatility. And basically, what we have heard about political parties, party government, all major governmental decisions must be taken on the basis of a program. This tendency and the high polarization between program proposed to parties, this tendency diminished in Western democracies and was never there in Central and Eastern European countries, because a bit of the new parties, they are not well entrenched in society. You don't have cleavages, you don't have clear programmatic ideologies, they are shifting a lot, you have mergers between parties, different strange alliances between left and right positioning, and you have it all over the region. Okay, there are a few exceptions. I know that by the end of this lecture I'm going to hear, yeah, but in Hungary there are only two parties and there are polarized Yes, there are exceptions, but the general trend would be that you do not have this clear divide between left and right is actually exhibited in programs and in the decision outcomes. And to take a look a little bit how it looks, for instance, in a post-communist country, you have in here two graphs. The first one is the evolution of governmental agenda. There are many so it's the evolution of governmental agenda on post-communist Romania. Basically, I took all the governmental decisions and look a little bit how the governmental agenda has shifted over time. So, did the government actually pick mostly, undertook mostly decisions related to the economic realm? Which governments? Were they left-oriented, right-wing-oriented? Did different governments undertook other sorts of reforms, of social reforms? You know this, we would expect that a left-oriented government would be more inclined towards social, to the social realm, while the right wing is going to be concentrated on reforming economy and so on and so forth. Now, these 9 are actually marking different governments, and as you can see, basically there are no divides between left and right. You are going to see that the question of security, that being defense and interior manners, are actually constant over time. Okay, they are increasing a little bit by the end of the 90s, beginning of 2000, because of NATO accession. The social cultural is varying, but strangely enough, the most reforms undertaken, so the most decisions that are regarding these issues, are taken by a right-wing government, not a left-wing government, while the economic issues are actually going up and down without actually following a certain trend. And you can tell me that these are decisions, so basically it's not about the substance of decision, but they are trying to reform different sectors within of the government. But look a little bit of budgetary allocation in the second table, and you are going to see the same very fuzzy picture that appears. So basically, it's true that in the beginning of the 90s, we are going to have high investments in the economic realm because we have this authoritarian referential. But after that, you don't have, when you are looking at the budgetary allocation, you don't have a general pattern in which basically left and right are actually behaving differently according to their ideological orientations. So you cannot rely on this, and of course there are macro trends. So basically you have external constraints. At least in the economic field, you are going to have the IMF, the World Bank, and the European Commission that are going to impose an agenda on the government in order to cope with the enlargement process. And you are going to have an external conditionality. But it touches also the social culture and all the domains. These would be the aggregated data, but when you are looking at every domain, you are not going to find an pattern that can explain an ideological polarization based on different party programs. So the party dimension cannot become the sole explanation for the way in which governments are working nowadays. And you are more and more inclined to look at individual leaders and look inside the box, see a little bit how different actors are working, how the way in which governments were created actually are affecting the coordination, the decisional outcomes as such. Now, at the level of the literature, you know that there are some theories stating that basically it counts a lot to look at the recruitment procedures as an ex-ante mechanism screening for the reliability of these actors. So if I'm a prime minister, okay, because you are all sleeping. Miss, you are sleeping.
No, I'm not.
You are not sleeping. Okay, if you are a prime minister and you have to build up your governmental team, what would you do?
At first, it's a long process, you know.
No, you are already elected. Okay,
Okay.
let's say that you are the leader of a party and you have to build up your governmental team. So where are you from?
From Romania.
Okay, you are the leader of, let's call it, the Green Party that won the election in Romania. And you have to build up your governmental team. You are the designated prime minister. What would you do?
I would choose the members
Okay.
of my future.
Okay, that's the idea. But how are you going to pick them? Okay, Miss. You are the prime minister. Okay, and you have to build up your governmental team. How would you choose? I mean, there are lots of party members. Okay, not so many, but let's say that there are lots of party members. How would you construct your team?
First of all, I would have a look at whom I trust. So probably the most important factor would be loyalty, because otherwise I cannot rely on them.
Okay.
There are any oppositional party members within my party who do not like my politics or my way of doing things.
Okay. So the persons that are reliable, how would you choose a person? How would you know that they are reliable or not?
There would probably be people I already work with,
Example.
maybe friends.
Sometimes friends. Okay. So basically you are going to pick your friends from your party. That being that you have been in politics for a long time, you are going to pick the ones that have been close to you, so you work together with and so on. Yeah, but you know, this is the theoretical point of view. That being, hey, there's a riot over that being, you are going to build up your if you are going to build up your governmental team as formed by friends, let's say, so people with seniority, people that have worked together, then you are going to have a consensual style of decision-making process. So you are going to discuss with them on different issues. You are going to be one of the pairs. So you are going to, you are not going to be the chief of that government in the general term, but you are going to be actually you are going to apply a collegiality sort of decision-making process in which you are going to understand each other, so you are not going to take votes, but you are going to debate on different issues. And this would bring actually the government to work together and to discuss different policies that are taken from the different domains. So you are the Minister of Finance, you are going to be the Minister of Education, and you are going to be the Minister of Interior. Let's call it like that. So if you have like an overall reform, you are going to be able to debate with each other, and you are going to support or not, but still you are going to remain, let's call it friends. But this ensures actually coordination, so that would be the theoretical point of view. So because you are able to track the other decisions that are undertaken by the other ministers, you are going to be able to track the governmental policies as such. Meanwhile, and this would be the other scenario, you can think of the Prime Minister as one of the heads of the governmental team. So instead of saying I'm going to take my friends, you can say what would be the reverse option.
I'm going to choose the ones within the party that have a background in that issue, that are competent in order to occupy that position.
You can say, I'm going to take the ones that can legitimize me. So they have this meritocratic background, the best. So I'm going to organize sort of, okay, I'm not going to do it like that, but I'm going to organize a selection based on their CVs, their biographies, their previous experience. Sometimes the party dimension even vanishes from this general framework. Look at a little bit at the US system. So there you have, for the executive teams, you are going to have co-options. They are not taken from parties, from within parties, they are actually picked from outside. And there you are going to have more problems with coordination from a theoretical perspective, because these people do not know each other and haven't worked together. So they do have an agenda, but a sectoral agenda, so they would try to control their own ministry without actually going and see what the other members of the other ministries are doing. So basically you are not going to have internal check and balances. Let's import this notion into our explanation within the governmental team. Instead, you are going to have a sort of departmentalists, so autonomous actors that are working together under the direct supervision of the Prime Minister, that instead is not going to have the time to see what is happening in all these institutions. Now, what is happening recently, okay, it's not so recently, but during the last 20 or 30 years, is that although no matter the sort of governmental formation style, you are going to see that in fact there is a lack of coordination. And even if you are going to gather your friends and decide over different issues with them in different cabinet meetings, you still don't have the time to actually go forward and look to in different domains, see what is happening in different policies. So instead you are going to see that ministers are going to become more and more sort of dictators of their own domains. So when you are going to become the Minister of Education, you are going to decide on education. You are not going to have a whole debate about how to reform the education, and you are going to ask the Minister of, I don't know, Healthcare whether he agrees with you or not. You are going to have this sectoral divide within government, and of course you are depending on the Ministry of Finance. That is going to become a core actor within the governmental team, but you are not going to have checks on every policies that are adopted within these teams. Yes?
I don't actually agree. I don't know about Romania, but for example in Slovakia, every single law have to be voted about in government first, and then it goes to national assembly. So in fact, if I'm a Minister of Education, if I want to change like almost anything, I have to discuss like every policy with all of my governmental colleagues, and they have like selected time to give their opinions about this, because like a governmental
that's everywhere in the world. I mean, you can have different procedures. So you can have like standardized procedures through which you have to initiate a governmental decision, and then you are going to have not the ministers, because they do not have the time, but junior ministers that are going to meet with each other and are going to approve or disapprove for all, not the bills as such, so the governmental initiatives that are going to the parliament, but mostly on different policies that are requiring actually financial aid. You are going to need the Minister of Finance that should agree on that, and so on. So this is a formalized procedure. Now, my question is, how many governmental decisions are undertaken per week in your country?
I don't know, I can check. But, I don't
Look at a little bit at the governmental agenda, okay? How many issues are on the governmental agenda in one session? And you are going to see that these are not big discrepancies. So you can check it in Belgium, you can check it in the US, you can check it everywhere. You are going to see that they are around, and that depends on the way in which you are constructing your agenda. But basically, the whole amount of decisions that are taken are about 60 or 70. So in one governmental meeting that can last, okay, in Romania we have exception. We have had like governmental meetings that lasted for 15 hours. So that prime minister was replaced very rapidly because the minister actually did not stand to be for 16, 15, 20 hours in one governmental meeting. But basically you are going to have a short agenda, that being issues that are discussed within government, and a long agenda that is approved by the government, and that would be of 70, 60 issues that are passed. And you cannot practically discuss 60 issues in 2 hours. So of course there is a certain coordination between lower levels, so you are going to have junior ministers that are debating with each other, but it's impossible even for a minister to track all the decisions undertaken under his mandate, basically. And what is happening is, yes, if you want to reform the educational system, so you are going to have a media backlash, so if you are taking these very visible measures, you are going to have debate. Otherwise, you are not going to have it. You are going to decide on your own ministry. Okay, you are not going to have a whole debate whether you are going to borrow your, I don't know, that building to another institute than the one that was initially designed to, or things like that. So basically, you have huge amounts of autonomy within your ministry. So and more the decision concerns only your own ministry, so it's not going to affect other domains. More you are independent in the decision-making process as such. Now, basically, because if you are depending, for instance, on the Minister of Healthcare, then you have to agree with him and to reach a consensus. But it's impossible, for instance, for a third party to tell me what to do in my own ministry, because they simply do not have the time in checking what is happening to the government. And although governments are collectively responsible in most of the cases for the decision that they are taking, basically what is happening, you are going to have one minister that is going to rule from the top level until the rest of the process of policy making and the implementation of different programs. And of course, it helps a lot whether you have an experienced bureaucratic realm or you have a politicized sort of bureaucratic realm. But again, when you are looking in different European countries, with the exception of Great Britain, maybe some Nordic countries, you are going to see an ongoing tendency of politicization or patronage practices. That are expressed differently. In the East, you are going to have politicized appointments. In the Western part, you have had a tendency to the economic crisis of increasing the bureaucratic realm. So basically, you are not going to dismiss civil servants because they are protected by law, but you are going to hire more persons that are loyal to you in order to be able to coordinate what is happening within your ministry. So this general focus on the way in which governments are actually working is telling you that there is a huge problem of coordination, that being every minister is going to look, most of the cases, okay, with the exception of big reforms, is going to look inside the ministry and is going to conduct his or her own policies. And it depends a lot on the party capacity to control over these issues, but sometimes there are party leaders themselves that are in these public offices, or the party is incapable actually of looking what is happening in the government. There are some cases, particularly in this, where it's very difficult to screen what is happening on all the government decisions. Okay, and these are the governmental decisions. Aside these governmental decisions, for instance, the table was built on 25,000 governmental decisions, so it's undertaking like 15 years. There are a lot of them, and they are doubled by different orders given. This is, okay, they have different names, but this is the general structure of the government in all countries. So basically, when you are looking what is happening within a ministry, then the minister has also at his disposal some means of regulating that, being you are going to have different orders given by the minister that are also published and enter into force after being published in the official journal. So basically, you are a huge amount of decisions that are undertaken by these individual actors that are not controlled by the other members of the cabinet, and they often escape the party coordination, so the party oversight on what is happening within that governmental team. So you have this ongoing process of having more and more lack of coordination, more lack of cooperation between governmental actors. And this is a structural problem. It's depending actually on the way in which governments are working and the way in which political decisions have become more and more complex, so and society develop. Now, in order to and I shall go to the third part of my presentation, stating that this governmental centrism was thought to be balanced by a decentralization process. The idea was that this emphasis put on the governmental and the executive at central level should be actually balanced by the creation, by lowering the level of decision-making process, delegating from above towards the local level. And it has been like this mythical objective of all the European countries from some time now. The main problem was that traditionally different states were constructed in a reverse logic, that being how to centralize different territories and how to construct a national oversight in order to create a common identity and have different decisions. Now, the process of decentralization would be the reverse phenomena without having a common standard or a common model of delegation. Okay, so every country, and you have seen different reforms in different countries, every country thought how to decentralize, how to bring the decision closer to citizens, how to reform the electoral system. Should we actually elect the local leaders? Should we actually, which is a common standard in Central Eastern European countries, but it's not a common standard in Western European countries. Take the mayors, you are going to see that in most Western democracies, the mayors are not directly elected. They are heads of the council list, so they are picked from the head of this list that are presented for different elections of councilmen, but they are not directly elected, they are appointed. In some countries they are appointed from above. And there are actually huge debates about how to decentralize. Take Norway, for instance, you are going to see that they are thinking about decentralizing, but at the same time introducing more democracy, but they haven't done it in one step, saying now, from now on we are going to have directly elected mayors, we are no longer having these managers that are actually civil servants, high civil servants. We are going to have direct elections, but they have tried to do it on some small constituencies in order to see how it works, so you don't have a generalized trend into that. And then the whole problem is when adopting this sort of decentralization, you are kind of in the same situation at the European level. Because at the European level, you don't have a symmetrical construction of power as in the national state. So it's the same thing at the local level. So you don't have the same system of check and balances. You don't have the mayor that is going to be the executive that is going to have one team, and then you are going to have the county or city council that is going to check on the executive, and you don't have the same mechanism of oversight. In some cases you may have it, in some others you don't have it. Look at Great Britain. Nowadays you have 3 systems of local arrangements in Great Britain, and cities were invited to pick. Do you want a manager? Do you want someone that is collectively a collective member of the team, or do you want a directly elected mayor? And you are going to see that very few towns in Britain have actually a directly elected mayor, because they have had this local referendum and the British citizens actually do not want to change their system. So how to bring more local accountability and how to delegate, okay, then how you are going to arrange the financial decision, how you are going to check what is happening at the local level. It's another issue to be debated. Now, strangely enough, you are going to have usually two main effects. You either are going to have more decentralization, but really a problem of coordination in order to, because you are going to assist the emergence of local barons, so-called local barons, so you are going to have local leaders that are becoming powerful leaders within the national system, and they are going to exert their influence over the national level. And you are going to have very powerful lobby coming from the local level to the national level, pressuring for more funds or different positions, or you are going to have a centralized situation in which you are going to have the mechanism without actually reinforcing that at the local level, that being given financial resources to these constituencies in order to institutionalize of high profile local communities that can fight against the center policy dimensions. Now, in Central and Eastern European countries, you are going to see that this has had an unexpected outcome. So the idea of decentralizing, the idea of bringing more local democracy created actually a depoliticization of local politics. So if in the Western part you are going to find different forms of politicization, so you are going to find leaders that are members of the local councils, but they are deciding with their parties. In Central and Eastern European countries, you are going to see that they are mostly independent. So you are going to have an important saying in the case of the independent list, independent candidate, which mostly doesn't mean that they are independent, it's just they are not assuming a political identity. Sometimes most of these leaders are actually backed by political parties. Then when we are looking at the local level, we are going to see, for instance, in Hungary, there are 85% of mayors that have no affiliation, no political affiliation. You can look similar data, you can find them in Czech Republic. You are Czech, no? No, you are not from Czech Republic. But also in Poland and in other countries. Now in Romania you have an atypical situation, but it's kind of the same. They are party leaders, most of them, and they do tend to be incumbents. So the incumbency level is increasing. It arrived recently. You have the data on the slide. Till 70%. It's just that they are ensured by a sort of political migration. So, okay, you have leaders that are elected, re-elected, but they are changing parties. So we have had, for instance, in the beginning of 2000, 84% of the incumbents actually changed their party affiliation, going to in order to run for the opponents, which is kind of a third, if I'm not mistaken. It's about 1/3 of the total population of mayors. So from the 3,000 mayors that we have, part of them were incumbents, and these incumbents were actually shifting parties. And this tendency has been preserved, in which you are by recycling different leaders in order to cope with the lack of personnel of political parties. Now, what I'm trying to look a little bit now is basically that you do have a problem with coordination at the central level, but decentralizing, which is good for democracy, bringing decision-making process closer to the citizen, in its turn creates actual problem of coordination, articulation of the political system. because these local leaders that are reinforced by the local legitimacy and access to resources have a problem of, face the problem of lack of party articulation on the ground. So, as opposed to the central level, where more or less you do have articulated parties that work and can actually oversight what is happening more or less with the governmental teams and policy making and parliamentary majority. At the local level, you do not have that. Most of the parties, as you are well aware of, are declining, are lacking actually organizations on the ground that can check what these representatives in public offices are doing. Some of them, at least in the eastern part, you're going to see that there are independents, at least they declare to be independent. Now, going back to the original question of this presentation, you can look at the current crisis, not the economic crisis, of course, this wasn't produced by the way in which different political systems are working, but the lack of replies to the economic crisis can be read through the glasses of the lack of coordination that is happening in national settings. So basically, founded on what I've presented, there are several hypotheses to be checked, okay, systematically in different countries, that being the existence of defective ex post forms of oversight makes actually different institutions to rely solely on these individual leadership profiles. The second one would be that the quest for decisional effectiveness creates actually the premises for autonomy and sometimes patronage, that depends on political culture, of course. And the fact that political leaders do not have this overall, cannot actually balance the ex-ante forms of oversight, cannot actually balance the lack of coordination within institutions. And the third one, that actually the decentralization process, although it increases vertical accountability, it doesn't solve the coordination problem, but actually enhances this problem, okay? So based on that, I have to construct, of course, take a sample of countries and apply that to the same indicators in order to have the data and to correlate that. But the main idea would be that you can look at the current crisis and what we tend to call the lack of transparency and effectiveness of the European institution and national context through the glances of this lack of coordination. Okay, thank you. Yes?
Just to clarify something, because we started working on the application to summer school something like 2 years ago to apply for Erasmus grant, but something changed from during this period, and we also host within the school students from Croatia, students from Czech Republic and Slovakia. So just to clarify things, and maybe Alexandra needs this information. Okay, sorry for this short introduction.
Okay. Questions? Yes.
Okay, maybe that's because it's early in the morning and I still don't understand something. But I don't see the link between the decentralization and the lack of coordination between regions and the lack of coordination on the national level. Because I understand there is a lack of coordination between decentralized regions, but why is this a problem? Because those issues that self-governments solve, I think they seem to me like issues that just actually do not need to be coordinated. So that's my question.
Okay. Yeah. Had the time to do it properly. If I have smarter,
I hope.
or not? Not. So, we shall try it in words. Basically, at the origin, okay? Think a little bit at the first picture that we have had. Okay, so basically we have the government that is going to delegate the prime minister, who is going to delegate to the junior minister, who is going to delegate to the bureaucratic world. So you are going to have a policy. In a centralized state, you are going to have a governmental initiative, I don't know, to control, to change the school system, okay? So you are going to take this decision and you are going to say the curricula will change, still a national context, it doesn't matter, will change, or I don't know, the teachers are going to be hired on this basis, so we are going to have a national context and so on. So we are going to pay them, I don't know what. So you are going to have this policy, and it's going to be decided by the minister, okay, saying that he's going to rule over his ministry, and it's going to be diffused into the territory under that form, okay? Now, decentralize that. You are going to say the school should be under the direct supervision of the local authorities, okay? So you are going to have a national curricula, but the teachers are going to be paid by the mayors that are going
Yes,
to...
but still on the rules that are based on the central policy. You know?
Not really, because basically you are decentralizing, you are having a general framework. So, okay, you have had that originally, okay, this is my minister of education, okay? And he's going to say to me, as I'm a junior minister for high schools and things like that, okay? There's a problem with high schools, high school teachers, you have to look a little bit how they are hired, and so on. Okay, so I'm going to speak, I'm going to coordinate my decision-making process, I'm going to ask different NGOs, whatever. And I'm going to make a policy by consulting my bureaucracy within the ministry. And then I'm going to apply this to the law. Okay, so persons from Wrocław, persons from Krakow are going to do the same. Okay? Now, the main problem becomes when I'm going to say, look, the resources, for instance, for hiring or dismissing different leaders, different teachers are going to be at the law. So you are going to have your own policy of hiring and dismissing teachers. If you are decentralizing financial needs, you are going to decentralize the capacity to decide on different issues. Of course, they have to be trained, they have to have a university degree. Okay, that would be the overall standard. But the policy as such, okay, how to reform school, whether you should invest, for instance, in more technical school or more social science-oriented school, that depends on the local administration. It's not a national policy. Okay, so you are going to have the mayor one that has to decide. Or it could be at the regional level, it could be at the county level, it could be at the local level. It depends a lot on different systems. Because you have several layers in here, it depends on the tradition. Now, he has to decide. So you are going to have human resources policy in Krakow or Granada constructed in a similar way with this level, the national level. The local level is not constructed through the paradigm of check and balances. It's similar, but not necessarily. You can have, for instance, county council or local council. Okay, the mayor can be the executive. But sometimes you can have executive decision undertaken by the council. Okay? Sometimes the regional leader can be a civil servant, so it's actually under the direct supervision of the council. It depends on the political system as such. So basically, you don't have the same accountability in the local institutional design as you would have it at the center. Their profile at the same time are not the same as at the central level. There are either independents, you don't have a local party identity. There are very rare situations in which you have strong parties on the ground. You do have a problem with the accountability and responsiveness of this leader at the local level. Now, that would be the prima facie. So that poses a problem in the way in which different decisions are undertaken and how to correlate them, coordinate them in order to have a unitary form of decisions regarding education, healthcare, and so on.
So the problem is like inside the regions themselves, not the lack of coordination between the regions.
How to actually delegate some of the attributes and still have cohesiveness within between the regions and the national level. In a federal state, it could work, but it's different when you are decentralizing the such without importing a form of federalism. Because in a federal system, you are going to have a similar structure of check and balances, which is not which was not made when you have decentralized. Okay, you haven't adopted the federal system; you just decentralized different sorts of companies. Now, the main problem, and the clashes emerge because these regional leaders that are deciding on healthcare, education, different policies, in their turn, they realize that they do have power. They have power because they can actually influence the national decision making. So basically, they can organize elections, and so all the electoral processes are organized on a territorial level. So even in cases when you have PR on closed list, you are still relying on these local leaders to mobilize the voters if they are having a party affiliation. And if they do not have, they are they can actually rely on them, they can negotiate that with all governments. If you don't have a party affiliation, I can back whatever party I may want. If you do have a party affiliation, still you are going to back the party central office. But I'm going to do that by bargaining something in return. I can ask for offices. It's a regular case. Look in the Spanish case. In the Spanish case, they decentralized, but it didn't actually bring more osmosis between the local level and national level. They do not want offices at the central level. What they want are actually incentives on the ground. Having more financial tools, more autonomy, which is directly the main problem, because if you want more autonomy and not to obey the national level directors, you are going to have even more lack of coordination. So what is happening, and that's why the main problem of decentralization, and sometimes in Central and Eastern European countries, you have had leaders that were reluctant to this idea. Romania is famous for that, but even in other countries, leaders from national politics that are consolidated, they do tend to stop this process of decentralization in the sense of having similar layers organized in the same manner at the local level, because that means that your power at the national level would be questioned and will be questioned. It's not.
It's more clear. Thank you.
Yes.
When you were seemed to me that you are only considering forming the government when you have clear majority in the parliament. Because when you form a coalition government, you are in a really quite a different situation, you know. And then maybe, and I want to ask if you have considered this also, and if you maybe see some different patterns, or if the problem with coordination is even stronger, because you can have, in the government you can have some ministers who really wants to have their own playground, and they do want to be really very autonomous on the prime minister or something like that, and then maybe you don't have just this vertical problem with coordination, but also a horizontal problem with coordination even within the government. So I want to ask if you have considered that and if you saw something like this.
Yeah, this was for simplification. Of course, when you are in a coalition, situation is more complex than that. Then you are going to have the coalition agreement, and usually the tradition is that all parties are going to pick their representatives in government. So the party leaders are picking their representatives in governmental teams. So the prime minister will have a say only over his ministers as such. So he's going to have a coalition if half of the government was not de facto selected by the prime minister. So you are going to have a problem of coordination from this perspective. Now you are going to have a second problem of coordination, but because parties are well aware of this departmentalism. So they are asking that when they are bargaining for different portfolios, they are going to say, look, I know, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Education, and the Ministry of Defense, and the others are going to take the other one. But I still want junior ministers' positions in the other ministries in which I do not have a minister. And then you are going to have a blockage, because the junior minister of my party that is in a ministry that is not directed by my party is going to try to block the minister initiatives, or to inform of everything that has been has been done in that ministry without working, because basically he's there to screen what is happening with the members of the coalition. And what you are going to have in there is less the lack of coordination. You are going to have conflicts, and that's why usually the coalition governments do tend to last less than a single party government such. But yes, you have, paradoxically, you do have more coordination, but the survival rates of this, because at least the members of different coalition partners are screening for each other. So basically they are looking what the others are doing in order not to be in a bad position. But then you are in a decisional gridlock, basically, because you are spending your time quarreling for different issues. Yes?
But another question on this process of decentralization. You want to say that decentralization as such versus or is worsening the situation for coordination and the democracy as such, because in Germany we have a federal system and quite decentralized system, and it works pretty well.
Yes, because you have a federal system.
So
because you have that. I mean, what I'm saying is that it's different when you are decentralizing the centralized state that has been constructed in a certain manner, and when you are having a federal state that actually has check and balances at the federal level. The problem with decentralization is that you are giving more competencies, but you are not importing the national idea of check and balances. You know, it's like, okay, let's decentralize. The mayors from nowadays, although they are directly elected or not, and look at most of the reforms that have been undertaken at the local level is either you are going to have directly elected leaders, but very few of them thought about competencies and attributes and how to construct check and balances between the representatives of the local level. In a federal state, you do have that. Okay, so even if the mayors are not at the very local level, I mean towns, the mayors and the city councils may not have this, but in Germany you have actually different forms and it's very progressive. You can actually remove them. You have a citizen initiative. There are very few cases in the US you have it as well. There are very few cases in which you do have these sorts of systems of accountability at the local level. In general, in Europe, you don't have these sorts. But my instinct, so my idea was that usually when you are decentralizing and you are looking at all the European countries, of course, there are exceptions. Poland is another exception because they do have these forms of local referendum through which you can actually remove the mayor from office. So it's a direct form of accountability. But usually when you are decentralizing, they decentralize and they thought about how to give different decisional powers to the local level, sometimes how to give the financial means to do that, sometimes not. But they haven't thought about how to ensure the check and balances at the local level. Yes?
In the decision-making process. You say that it is diminishing more and more. How do you reconcile this with the fact that in coalitions, it's actually the parties that, and the ministers and junior ministers, they assume the identity of the party, and this leads to conflicts. So it seems that the involvement of the party dimension is not really that weak when it comes to the decision-making process and all these cooperation mechanisms that they involve. This is one question, how do you reconcile to diplomacy? And at the same time, also, if we think that, so that parties influence diminishes, then how, but at the same time, you don't say that the government is getting more technocratic and more professional in a way. So they are still recruited from parties, but technocrat ministers have almost no support from parties, and that makes their work in ministry very difficult, and their tenure is short. And almost all ministers interviewed or say that it's better to have political affiliation than to be an outsider or technocrat, because they don't have credibility. So these two issues seem not to substantiate the fact that party involvement is not important. I mean, it's not that hard. And also, especially in coalitions, if you have a decision, you also have those to take the decisions within governmental sessions, whatever. You still have to go with that decision to a party to get your mandate as a minister from your party on certain decisions, because parties have then to explain to the electorate, and they have to do some cost-benefit calculation for the electorate. So it seems like they're really present and everywhere, although not ideologically, but in an identity, assuming identity.
Okay, these are very good questions. It's true that I referred to single-party government and not coalition case because these are more complicated. Okay, it would have been even more fuzzy as a pronunciation. So, but coming back to your questions, I mean, I'm not arguing that all the ministers are becoming democratic. They are not. I mean, it suffices to look a little bit on governmental teams. You are going to see that these are party members. What I'm arguing, and it's not what I am arguing, but basically what the literature of party politics is arguing, is that you have a decline of parties, of party government formula. It doesn't mean that they are not party members as such. That's a reply to the first question. It's like the party are declining or they are changing their internal configuration. So basically these parties are heavily dependent on the persons in public offices. Heavily dependent on persons in executive positions, that being parties are depending on financial resources of the state. So when you are a minister, you tend to control your party. It's not the reverse situation in which theoretically it is the party leader that is outside. Okay, there are exceptions, I'm well aware. But the idea is that usually the evolution of parties, and there are, for instance, in Norway, this is an exception. They are still have these parties with strong activism, party leaders at the top, and different parties in central offices. But usually in Europe, that was the tendency, saying that the persons that are appointed in executive positions are actually the party leader, or either overlapping with the party leadership, or more important, considered to be more important to the party than the party leadership in itself. So you are going to have a predominance in which you don't have a party oversight because you have this predominance. Now let's turn to the coalition behavior. In the coalition behavior, of course, you are not going to have, and this is going to seem very simplistic, but it's true, you don't have all the party leadership involved in public offices. You have some delegates. Okay, you are thinking of the Romanian term. It's true that parties often pick also independents to fill this position, but this was when they expected that the government will not survive. So in order not to worsen the image of your own members of the party, then you are going to designate a technocrat in public office that can bring you some legitimacy in the public eye. But now let's turn to this representative that you are appointed in public offices that are defending your party lines. They are not defending the party lines as such. There are no party lines as such. They are defending a very narrow circle of leaders within parties that are often relate to the party in public office components. You don't have programmatic sorts of defense in which you are going to have the party on the ground that is going to vote on a program and they are going to... The quarrels within government are over resources, are not over programmatic issues, usually. And this is not a Romanian idiosyncratic way of thinking. Usually, the coalition splits are either after mediatic scandal or after fighting over resources. Okay, it's not they haven't obeyed the coalition agreement. It's not that they haven't. It's about who gets what and how the distribution of incentives is actually overlapping the distribution of seats within government and the force within the coalition. And that's why you have quarrels. It's not that the liberals are not agreeing with the social democrats and the Christian democrats within government. It's not ideologically driven. And you do have forms of oversight only in cases, and let's go back to the Romanian case because you are implicitly referring to that. You do have these sorts of ministers that are going to the party and are saying what they are going to do, but only the persons that do not have party seniority. Party vice president appointed in a coalition government will not go to the party every week to ask whether he can undertake a policy or not. This happens when you are picking outsiders and you are going to put them over there and you are trying to control them somehow. But usually you do have, of course you have a party label, and the role of party as a main selector becomes or remains one of the most important, but at the same time it's not a party in government. The idea of party in government was that you have a program that was voted by the citizens and you are going to do no matter what in order to defend that program. With the means of your party members that have worked a lot within your party, it's the party paradigm, if you want to call it. So basically, we have this polarization. Parties are representing society. Those that are in cabinets are over there as agents of the party that is the principle that is going to apply ad literam the party program. This is no longer the case, with very few exceptions. And you can argue And you are going to see at the level of the literature on party politics, for instance, that the reverse sort of, and you have heard it in the lectures as well. You do tend to have like conservative parties that are undertaking progressive positions or reforms and so on, or they tend to agree on different issues all around Europe, although they do tend to be ideologically opposing from an electoral perspective. But I mean, and I don't remember what the question was about. So the first one was about the party in government decline. The second was about the coalition behavior and the fact that they are still appointed by the parties.
Yes,
And the third?
the
technocratic.
The dimension of the parties.
And the technocratic, the decline of, I haven't documented the decline of party. I can say, at least in the Romanian case, you don't have a correlation between left, right, the decision on undertaking the budgetary allocation. I mean, at the same time, this technocratic ideal is rather a centralist and European obsession. I don't believe that people in Germany are obsessed with having technocratic governments. No, it's kind of a centralist and European thing. From time to time, in times of trouble and crisis, we tend to say, let's turn to technocratic personnel in order to save our government. You can explain it from a cultural perspective, because you have had it even starting from communists. You have this myth of technocratic dimension, progressive dimension, have engineers, technical expertise, and all that. So we don't have to have a reflection of issues, political issues. You have to have this technical dimension, which was reproduced in the beginning of the 90s through the glances of technocratic personnel. So from time to time, you are going to have this idea that the technocratic government will solve the problems, the current economic crisis. And
the fact that they're not stable because they don't have party support, it would mean that actually parties are important dimensions to be.
the party leadership, yes, it's just that you don't have a party coordination. And the party leadership, it's oftentimes the party is composed of party representatives in public offices. Rarely you are going to have leaders that are staying at home and they are designated ministers that are not in the party leadership. Look at it a bit in the Romanian case. Usually the prime minister in parliamentary democracy is the party leader. The party is in public office.
If I can say something, in Czech Republic we had within 3 years the second technocratic government. And every time we have some crisis, it is the solution in the last time, because the parties doesn't take responsibility. So it's such a leak and trick maybe for the voters, and they appoint always a technocratic government, and also the prime minister is not a member of any party. But these governments have really big support among the citizens of Czech Republic. So could you see like maybe also such a problem, and also maybe problem of democracy and problem of how the political parties are functioning? Because it is not exactly, it doesn't correspond with the case of Romania, I think.
It does. I mean, and you can see it in Hungary as well, when it was a main crisis. Basically, they picked a technocratic government. In Romania, we have had it as well. Not a technocratic government, let's say, but we do present different persons, more or less related with the political realm as being technocrats, so having their degrees, and in order to legitimize a public office by saying, look, we are going to appoint a new figure coming and saving Romania with but this is in the region, and this is the result of the fact that parties are failing. They are less institutionalized than in Western Europe. In Western European countries, they are declining in terms of membership activism. They are reforming, but in Central and Eastern European countries, they weren't really well constructed to begin with. They had some national leadership, they had some programs, but they haven't got this form of activism that then declined. They did not consolidate on the ground at all. With the exception of successor parties that inherited the communist structures, you are not going to see parties that are like mass parties, or at least they are having a territorial reach sufficient in order to support the idea that the party is present in your community. Okay, big cities you are going to find them, in small cities they are absent, so you are going to have independence. So, I mean, the main difference would be that while the parties are declining in the West, they still have this idea, this tradition of doing things. They still are accountable, at least to their image, if not to actual activists and their historical traces. Meanwhile, in Central Eastern European countries, you don't have that. Okay, you have it a little bit at central level when you have the national leadership and public figures, but on the ground you have nothing, which actually increases the problems with the decentralization, for instance, because how to politicize something that is not politicized, how to bring parties when there are no parties. So when you have these narrow circles of leaders at the central level, at a given moment in time, okay, by rotation they are going to come into in public offices, so you are going to have an extensive erosion of confidence in these countries. And of course, the decline of confidence, you can see it in Western democracies as well. But when compared with Central and Eastern European region, you are going to see that, in fact, the low trust is an overall characteristic of this system. And of course, there are differences because there are more advanced, more functional party systems than others, even within the region. But that's why you are going to have technocrats, okay? When parties are failing, when the confidence level in parties is at 9%, then you do tend to find some way of legitimizing, some sort of legitimacy. And the technocratic one, it's a hand to say so, because of the communist ideology and the political culture of the region. But I don't believe that it would work, because basically with technocratic government you are in the situation as a local level of managerial position, that being you have no form of accountability. You can say that I'm living next day and basically I'm accountable to no one. Okay, I have had my office, I can live it. I don't have a structure that depends on my performance. I'm only relying on myself. Yes?
One question. When you consider that the lack of coordination at the local level is justified partly by the limited financial resources the mayors have at their disposal, I know you are referring dominantly to barons, to the so-called president, so-called barons, generally the presidents of the county councils. But in effect, I think the lack of coordination on the basis of the scheme you put there is partly motivated by the scarce financial resources the mayors have to manage. And I think this is actually the real problem of decentralization and collecting financial resources, putting together budgetary allocations and so on. Secondly, I'm wondering if, for instance, at the local level, there is an audit committee composed of the local councillors and sometimes, for instance, the checklist of some, let's say, technocrats, local technocrats. I know you're focusing on party oversight, but I am wondering if these audit committees have a say in accountability
countries, you are right. It's just that I was trying to construct a model that will be tested, and one of the situation would be that in fact you are having, for instance in Romania, we do know that you are having a lack of coordination also because the decentralization in Romania has been done by decentralizing the attributes, the competencies. So basically the school system, the healthcare system came under the responsibility of mayors without actually giving the financial means to do so. So it's very nice that the mayor has the opportunity of hiring or paying salaries without having the funds of doing so. It's very difficult to have a coordinating policies or to invest in education in other programs because you don't have the money to pay for the school system such, which is true. But this is not the case in other democracies. I mean, there are countries in which the decentralization actually implied also financial sorts of decentralization. I mean, you have had the free dimension. And it's true that the financial means are lacking on the ground in all the countries. Okay, if you are going to ask a local authority, I don't think that you are going to ask to find an answer. I'm satisfied with the level of financial means that I do have at my disposal. But still in the Romanian case, I believe that is kind of a sort of an outlier because the financial decentralization was not made in a proper manner and still an ongoing process and debatable process. And I believe there are situations in Eastern European countries where it is the same. But then you have to compare with the national budget, as the national budget doesn't suffice as well. So what I'm looking at is rather, are there mechanisms to finance what you are decentralizing or not? And from this perspective, Romania is rather an exception in this process of decentralization. Now, in what concerns the second, of course you can have local, I mean, I believe the main problem is that you have lots of ideas of how to construct, okay, all national states are constructed the same, the national level, the local level are constructed differently. I mean, if you are taking the local, regional, that depends. The regional levels, the local level in different countries, they do not resemble with each other. Of course, in some systems you can have check and balances, so you have different sorts of committees that can act more or less. But it depends also on the type of mayor's leadership. It depends a lot on the sort of local configuration of power, whether you have a coalition, what sort of coalition. Then you can enter into details. For instance, with Ms. Angel's question on coalition, you can apply that at the local level, because at the local level you are going to have another majority or not, and you have to see how to accommodate the local majority, so party majority and party coalition with the national government. So it's more complex than that. You can argue that there are more check and balances, but the more check and balances you may have from this perspective, so blockage, veto players, not check and balances, the more veto players that you are going to have is less coordination, but at the same time you don't have check and balances in the traditional sense of the word. So I'm not saying that there aren't situations, there are systems that are trying to have this sort of reform and to think a little bit at the competencies, trying to see whether if we are going to have managerial type, then you have to rethink the competencies and try to see how the council is overviewing this managerial type. It's just that you have really a puzzle. I mean, there are on the slides different systems presented. Okay, there are attached to the slide, appended to the slides. But you don't have a common denominator. The main problem being there are very few systems that are ensuring accountability, with the exception, of course, of federal states, where at least you do have this sort of check and balances at the federal level. But when you are decentralizing a centralized state, and look at the local configurations of powers, you are going to see that in most cases you do have overlapping spheres between the executive, legislative, no real oversight between the two of them. Yeah, this can be an explanation for, but you know, in Central Eastern European countries, usually you are going to have persons that get along with each other. So they are going to rotate in public offices. But this is a Romanian bias at the same time. Because if you are looking, for instance, in Hungary, you are going to see that the incumbency level is much more lower than in the Romanian case. So these independents do not tend to get reselected at one would expect. You are thinking at the 70% that we had it in 2012. But at least the studies that have been done, they are independent, they are supporting different parties, but there are lower levels of incumbency. Because at least if they were incumbents, they were interested in continuing their mandates, that being they had in mind a form of accountability. But when you are looking at the region, okay, not this example, Romanian example, we are going to see that that the incumbency levels are not ensuring, are not reflecting such a tendency. Yes.
I have only a short and a more general question, because we are speaking about political elites and parties and all that. What do you think is the role and the impact and the pressure created by protests and social movements upon this decision process making? And what do you think is the connection between political parties and social movements in the context when, as you said before, we lost trust in political parties and with all the crisis and everything? And you can make a connection to the case of Bulgaria, maybe.
Okay, there are several layers. If you are referring to street movements or the traditional organization of civil society. I mean, if you are looking of NGO, for instance, or trade unions, that's the end of it. Because we all know that they are declining, the trade union is in Central and Eastern European countries. Because if you are going to France, you are going to see that trade unions are actually working. Okay, but in Central and Eastern European countries, you don't have a tradition of trade unionists. For instance, in Germany, it works. Romania, no.
I'm speaking more about contentious politics and protests, but more not in the sense of NGO and trade unions, but of social movements and.
Okay, we had it as well. I mean, not in the Turkish case, but we did have some reactions to the crisis against the government in Romania. So using Facebook and sort of social networks, but I mean.
So my question was, could this mobilization, mass mobilization, not the case of Romania because they were kind of small.
Yes, but there is no
could
mass
they
mobilization.
Yeah, I know, but from a theoretical point of view, could they create a pressure about the decision-making process? So what is the connection between the two parts of?
This would be
only speaking about political elites is kind of restricting.
Okay. The political elite and at the level of the decision-making, the members of the government and parliament tend to go towards the classical forms of representation within civil society. That being, if you want to take a decision, then you are going to consult NGOs, you are going to consult trade unions. Even if they are not important, you are going to invent an NGO in order to have a formal consultation in order to legitimize your decision. So even when they are not present, you are going to invent them. That would be the Central and Eastern European way. In other democracies, that exist. Now, about the movement, I believe that there is a huge difference between the Arab Spring, for instance, and what is happening in Europe. You can have different sorts of mobilization, but what we have seen is that you don't have masses that are coming, and politicians actually take into consideration the numbers, so the number of people present in the streets. So if you are going to have 1,000 person in the street, you are going to make an appeal, you are going to have a good PR strategy, but you are not going to respond to the pressures of 1,000 persons in the main square of one city. It's cynical, but it's true. Now in Romania, it's true that you have had an outcome from this sort of process, but it's only because actually the government was not doing so well, so they tried to reshuffle, and it was, okay, the worst reshufflement ever for that party, but still they were, this was in accordance with the lack of majority within parliament, political migration, and the very poor situation in which the government was in. So, and it was a way to reply to the street saying, look, we are, but they were at 11% or 15% in the polls. In the survey, the level of confidence in government was at 11%. They haven't replied to the street as such, they replied to their situation, political situation at that time. Usually you don't have it. If you have violent forms, God forbid.
Bulgaria, there were some mass mobilization and some extreme forms of protest.
Yeah, but how many? The question would be, if your level of confidence is high, or if you have no will whatsoever to leave your office, are you going to resign because you are going to have 1,000 persons on the streets?
Not to resign, but to take into account the fact that because
I'm not saying that it's not going to, I know this is the idea of transnational forms of mobilization and the importance of how the NGOs have become, which is a common feature in political science nowadays, saying that although the traditional forms of participation are in a huge dissolution, they are going to be transformed through the use of new technologies and a new form of direct democracy expressed through online means and so on. I'm well aware of this thesis. It's just that I think that the inference probably is a little bit debatable between what is happening in governmental offices and what is happening within institutions, and the fact that there are small street riots or there are this sort of movements. I believe that they are rather more exposed to instrumentalization than to the actual lobby for the public. But I could be wrong. I mean, I haven't actually looked into that. I'm not working into that, so maybe it's going to work in the future. Yeah, questions? Break? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.